Good afternoon, college students. So today, first of all, great job on those Boston Massacre posters. Really good. I enjoyed viewing those yesterday. I was very impressed with the effort. So, and I believe everybody I graded yesterday got a perfect score on that. And that does not always happen. Okay. So, I mean, it happens a lot with my college kids, but it doesn't always happen. So, good work. Nice effort. Um, so, I'm going to finish my lecture from the other day. Now, normally I wouldn't do that. Well, shouldn't say that. Well, actually, yeah, normally I wouldn't do that. Normally I would just post what notes are left so you guys could view them. But some lectures I feel I need to finish if I don't get through them. And the reason why I want to finish this one is this last section of it. A lot of times I've pulled an essay question out of it. Okay, so I really want you to hear my explanation of it. And I want these notes to be available to you. So I'm recording this. I think I'll post it on the same post as the other, so it's all together. So I'm going to record this, lecture on it. We get close to test time, I'll include the PDF of it on there. Okay, or maybe I'll even do that soon, just so it's all in one place. Just because, once again, in the past, I've had an essay question based on this last section, so it's kind of important. Now, I'm not going to require that you post on this one, so you don't have to give me a comment on this. You've kind of already done that with much of this content. But you may want to listen just so you learn it and maybe write some things down, all that stuff, just to learn it. What else? Or something else I was going to say with that? Well, I'm not going to post it because I am going to assign chapter 6 questions today, but those aren't going to be due until Monday. If you want to start them tonight, not a bad idea. Instead of maybe tackling them all at once, they're probably less burdensome if they're spread out. Okay. All right. So that's why I don't want to make a comment on what I lecture on today. Okay, so let me share my screen here, and hopefully I've got, did I even have the keynote down here? I may not. So let me do that really quick. Okay, good, it's right here. All right, get to the right slide here. Okay. This shouldn't take as long as my lectures normally do, but then again, sometimes thoughts enter my brain and I end up saying more than I thought I was going to say anyway, so forgive me for that if that happens. But anyway, just to remind you where I left off with this story, right? So the title of this is Events Leading to Revolution. And I left off with England closing the Boston Harbor, right, as part of the Intolerable Acts. And that was largely in response to the events of the Boston Tea Party, okay? As another result of the Intolerable Acts was making Massachusetts less democratic, limiting how often they could have town meetings, for example. So that was very upsetting to the colonists. And so we see our first Continental Congress form in 1774. And their response is going to be to provide a list of grievances to Parliament and a petition to King George III. Okay, and we'll talk about that response in events to come. The colonists also unite here to agree to a complete boycott of British goods. So that's where I left off last time. And I think it's also important, and your text does a nice job at this. I mean, I cannot stress to you how impressed I am with this textbook accounting of the American Revolution. It's pretty good. Once again, I don't know if it's the most readable, but it's a very good accounting. They do a nice job. And they do mention the role of women in this. And I think that's good because that sometimes gets left out of the story. And what we see with the Daughters of Liberty and other women throughout the American Revolution is very important to. There will be some women who will disguise themselves as soldiers and fight in the American Revolution. But of course, for the most part, women are left out of that, right? They're not allowed to participate in the military at all. But their roles of support are incredibly valuable. And one of the ways in which they did that was through aiding in, during the war, providing of supplies, kind of like encouraging people to donate to the military and all those things. But in the events leading up to the revolution with the non-importation agreements and the boycott, women will be really key to providing homespun cloth so that the colonists are not producing British textiles. When you think about it, this is kind of inspirational. I mean, India will do the same thing in 1948 under the leadership of Mohandas K. Gandhi in boycotting British textiles in India, which will lead to the Indian Revolution. So this is an incredibly valuable thing that women are doing One of the prominent groups in doing that was the Daughters of Liberty. They supported boycotts. They held spinning bees in which they would reduce. These were literally like competitions in which they would produce as much cloth as possible. And it was as much as you could produce, but that it was still quality, right? So that was how you won the competition when you had these spinning bees, okay? So important to mention them, although maybe too briefly. Okay, so this brings us to what is often considered the first conflict of the American Revolution, and that is Lexington and Concord. We're talking about Lexington, Massachusetts here, right? The British want to seize colonial military supplies at Lexington. There's a cache or a supply of weapons there that they want to seize. And they're trying to find, and this is in 1775, April 19th of 1775. They also want to capture John Hancock and Sam Adams, who are holed up in Lexington, okay? And they're actually gonna leave. They're gonna get away. They're not gonna get John Hancock and Sam Adams, and that's gonna be due to Paul Revere. Now, Paul Revere doesn't go screaming, on his way to Lexington, the British are coming, the British are coming. It was actually more discreet than that. And William Dawes was also involved in this too, but he kind of gets left out of it. You don't really remember him as another guy warning Lexington that the British were coming. But nevertheless, the warning will be successful, at least in making sure that militiamen were ready when the British got there. And there were 77 militiamen at first, 700 British troops at first. A shot rang out. And if you continue to read about this, most sources say no one really knows who fired the first shot. But of course, this is known as a shot heard around the world because it's going to lead to the American Revolution. And if you remember what a previous lecture I said, this could kind of be considered a world war because it's going to involve multiple continents. France is going to get involved, for example, right? So this is some of this. Now, this is the American Revolution, but it's also part of England and France kind of constantly being at war with each other for empire as well. It's all kind of wrapped up in that, okay? Now, what's interesting about Lexington and Concord from a revolutionary standpoint is that 8 Minutemen die, which is sad, right? But the fact that they're able to inflict 300 British casualties. Now, the number of militiamen that show up is greater, about 2,000. By the time the fighting kind of, travels, so to speak, to nearby Concord, Massachusetts, there's 2,000 militiamen on the scene. So it starts out with the militiamen being vastly outnumbered, and then the British are outnumbered. But there are 300 British casualties inflicted. And what this tells the colonists, this is a boost to morale, right? Like, hey, maybe we can do this. We can stand up to these British, military forces who are being so oppressive towards us, at least from our perspective, right? So it's a boost for revolution, Lexington and Concord is in that respect. And militiamen, if you don't know who they are, or Minutemen, as they were called in this case, are militiamen who could be rallied at a minute's notice. So they're local defense groups. There's no national military here, right? Colonies defend themselves based on militias. Okay, so we're going to have to raise a national military to wage this war. Okay. Now, this brings me to the heart of what I want to talk about to close out my lecture. Although you can see I've got a few slides to go through yet, if you look to the left of my screen here. But I want to talk about advantages, and this is what I often turn into an essay. And your next test, kids, we're going to be back to normal, so it's not going to be open note this time. You're going to actually have to study this stuff and probably write it down, okay? But we want to look at advantages going into the conflict. Now, obviously, the English have a lot of advantages. Population is key in waging a war. You got more people, you can recruit more soldiers, right? So the English outnumber us, 7.5 million Britons to 2.5 million colonists. Probably shouldn't say us but I guess I can, I'm an American, right? But it's, not my time period. They have greater wealth, much greater wealth in the colonies. They have a world empire, and wars are expensive. Right? War, you got to ship people, you got to make weapons, you got to feed people, and war is expensive. They have the best Navy on the planet. They are a professional army versus militia. Now, the militia, and I'll probably bring this up again, the militia are skilled at non-traditional warfare, that thing that we like to call, that strategy that we like to call guerrilla warfare, and that is very effective at times in a conflict. but they're not going to win based on guerrilla warfare, right? They're going to need a professional army to help in this conflict as well, okay? And they're going to need the help of the French as well. The British are going to employ 30,000 German Hessians who are mercenaries, skilled fighters, often ruthless at times. And then you've got 50,000 American loyalists. So what you don't have in the colonies, it's not like every colonial subject is like, yeah, British are evil, right? You know, this isn't like the axis of evil here. It's different, you know. Some colonists have no desire to leave the kingdom, right? Why would you want to leave the greatest empire on the planet? We're English. Why would you want to leave the protection of the Navy, right? Some of them have very strong ties to their families or are still living in England. So there's not, you know, it's not 100% loyalty among the colonists. And those loyalists at times are going to actually help British forces, whether it be through supplies or espionage. Okay. But there are some weaknesses. There are some challenges that the English have to overcome to subdue the American rebellion, right? They have, you know, if you have an empire, you have a lot of problems. There's a lot to manage. You know, the sun never sets on the English Empire. Well, guess what? The sun's never going to set on probably people rebelling against you either, right? And Ireland is almost always rebelling against England, and they were dealing with yet another rebellion in Ireland in this time. So they're dealing with multiple rebellions. France is going to get involved on our side. We probably don't win this without them. You know, Americans always like to joke about French military prowess, but the reality is we probably don't win the American Revolution without the help of the French. There's going to be issues in the British government. Not all the parliament supports this. There is a political party. This is that populist movement in England that the landed gentry, the nobles, were concerned about. There's that populist movement, the commoner movement that is opposed to British oppression of the colonies. The Whigs are just like, if the colonies want to be independent, let them go, right? That's just kind of their deal. They're all about independence and democracy. One of our first political parties, now our first political parties are going to be the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, but then our second most significant political parties are going to be the Democrats and the Whigs, and the Whigs are modeled after this British version. Okay, although our Whig party was probably more conservative in nature than the British version. There's also going to be, we talked about the British military being quite formidable, and it is, but the reality is the best generals aren't going to be on the English side. You know, next week as you read this next chapter, although I haven't read it yet because it's a new text, but I would imagine, because most textbooks do, it's going to talk about the mistakes that British generals make in this war, and they make some dumb mistakes. And a lot of it's probably out of cockiness, really. They look down on the English soldiers. They see this ragtag, or they look down on the Continental Army. They see it as a ragtag, unorganized group. There's no way these rebels can stand up to the British military. And they'll make some, you know, they don't, for example, they don't always pursue as forcibly as they should to eliminate Washington's forces, okay? Mistreatment of soldiers, morale is going to be low among British troops during different times throughout the conflict. Some of it even just coming over on the ships where guys are getting sick and, you know, they're away from home. You know, so morale is not good. They're going to deal with, now we just mentioned how we're going to have a hard time supplying the Continental Army, but the English Army is going to be poorly provisioned at times too. You know, once again, they're traveling from 3,000 miles away, and yes, there's loyalists who will help them, but there's different parts of the colonies that are very liberty-based, and they're going to have to, and what's going to happen here is at times the British are stealing colonial goods, right? Burning towns in some cases. Sometimes that's exaggerated by Hollywood, but it did happen. And they're going to, you know, steal supplies, and that's going to, at times, that's going to drive more of the colonists over to the Patriot side. Okay, and then of course, kind of a basic fundamental, you know, war concept is it's easier to defend than it is to invade. You know, it's easier to conquer or to defend than to conquer. I'm sorry, particularly if you're 3,000 miles from home. And the United States is a vast territory, right? We haven't conquered obviously all the West yet, but there's still a lot of territory there in which Washington can take his army. And Washington, I should probably save this for another slide. Well, actually, are we good on this? Does anybody need more time on this one? Okay. It's kind of one of the reasons I ramble, is to give you time to write things down. But this is a nice transition here, because we have a great general. I mean, George Washington is a very good general. And sometimes it doesn't always seem like that, because when you study his tactics, he loses more battles than he wins. But he realizes something very early in the war. In order to succeed, my army has to survive. I don't have to win every battle. I just have to survive. And what Washington will be skilled at is knowing when to fight and knowing when to take the British by surprise, right? Crossing Delaware is the most famous example of that. But he's good at that. I mean, he knows when to fight. He knows when to run away. You know, you're an idiot if you just keep fighting until your guys are dead, right? I mean, he knew what to do. And that's kind of where he gets praised. He was also one of those leaders that was inspirational. His men loved him. And that, you know, he's a good leader. He's a good leader. And then Ben Franklin will be a skilled diplomat. And we're going to get a treaty at the end of this war that is very advantageous to the United States. And a lot of that is going to be to the negotiations of Ben Franklin. So leadership on the American side is good, many historians will state. And I've already mentioned aid from France. We're also going to get help from leaders from abroad, like Marquis de Lafayette, who will be a skilled general for the French, who will fight. I mean, he was literally out of work. He was kind of like a mercenary. He's like one of the first Frenchmen to get involved in this. He'll come fight on the side of the Continental Army. He's a friend of Washington's. He'll train troops, things like that. He's a good leader himself. Fortunately, he'll end up dying in a dungeon during the French Revolution. We're also, once again, we're defending our homeland. Easier to do. I mean, nothing's easy in war. Nothing's easy in war. War is horrible. Okay, I'm not trying to trivialize this, and some of these battles are pretty brutal. Okay, but defending your homeland is typically easier than invading another. You know where to go. You know where to get supplies. You know where people are friendly or not. I mean, there's just a lot of advantages to it. And we did have a self-sustaining agriculture. Now, don't get me wrong. There are times in which the military is lacking supplies, but there are resources that can be acquired from the land, and that could at least cause that. Once again, what's the key? The Continental Army needs to survive. As long as the Army continues to exist, okay, the revolution goes on. I mean, if you think about the revolution, Britain captures most of our cities, okay? They capture New York, they capture Boston, they capture Philadelphia, but the Army just won't go away. In some respects, you can compare this a little bit to the Vietnam conflict. Think about what happened with the United States. There's actually a lot of comparisons between these two conflicts. Look at what happened in the United States and Vietnam. We were clearly the superior military, won most of the battles we were in Vietnam, but the Viet Cong just wouldn't go away. That's what's going to happen in the American Revolution. They just won't go away. They just won't quit. And some of that is due to this last thing here, this moral advantage, this just cause. Particularly once the Declaration of Independence is written, and there's those ideals are so eloquently stated by Jefferson, right? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? Equality, all the things that you can read about in Declaration, which is kind of our creed, okay? The values that we live by. Once those are communicated, Washington reads it to his troops in the defense of New York City. They don't win the defense of New York City, but it's nevertheless an inspirational moment. And so what you've got is a just cause. You're fighting for your homeland. You're fighting for, I mean, your family's not too far away in some cases. And then you're fighting for those principles that are espoused in the Declaration of Independence. British troops are being sent abroad, to fight for the empire, right? It's not as morally, justifiable. Once again, you can maybe compare that a little bit to the Vietnam conflict with us. Okay. Some weaknesses, to be sure. They're badly organized. They're lacking in unity. And what I mean by this is the individual states are going to be states now, right? They're going to stress their own sovereignty. They're not going to always respond to the dictates of the Continental Congress. They're not always going to provide what they should be providing to the Continental Army. There's going to be rivalries. There's going to be currency issues. Continental money, which is money that the Continental Congress prints, is essentially worthless. State money is valued much more. People don't even want to use the Continental Army. So there's going to be tremendous inflation. Taxation is difficult. And these are all the problems that I'm sure you're aware of from your past studies that are going to exist with the Articles of Confederation, and why there's going to be a call to make a stronger constitution. And militiamen, despite their prowess with guerrilla combat, fighting, from trees and all that stuff, they're going to be unreliable, right? They're not, embedded in a Continental Army, a professional army. If they want to go home and plant crops, they're going to do that. If they just want to leave, they're going to do that. So they're not going to be as reliable at times. It's why, sometimes too much is made up of the militia. And sometimes we take away from the efforts of the professional army in Washington because we like to glorify our guerrilla warfare. Not that it wasn't a factor, but the fact that the Continental Army gets better, that's a pretty key factor in defeating the British. Okay. Mentioned the lack of military supplies, weapons, gunpowder, manufactured products, clothing. Once again, that's because of the lack of unity among the colonies. Sometimes they want to focus on other things. Valley Forge, of course, is the best example of that. I don't know what you remember about Valley Forge. Let me make sure I get my dates right here. But Valley Forge will take place the winter of 1777 to 1778. Valley Forge is located in Pennsylvania. The Continental Army will spend much of the winter there after a series of losses to British troops. Guys will lose toes, and they're in the winter and they don't even have new boots and all that stuff. It's horrible. I can't imagine spending a winter like what these guys spent. And this is when morale was at its lowest, at its absolute low for the Continental Army, was Valley Forge. Okay, 2 slides to go. 2 slides to go. Other weaknesses. The British are actually the first to promise freedom to slaves. And so they're going to do that in April 75, even before the Declaration of Independence is issued. So understand, fighting is already occurring before the Declaration of Independence occurs, but they're going to do that early. It's a proposition by British Lord Dunmore, promised freedom to slaves who would fight for the British, and many of them do. As a matter of fact, there will be more American slaves who will fight for the British than will end up fighting for the Continental Army. Now, the Continental Army does eventually do this, but they don't do it until 1778. Okay, so that's a resource that maybe wasn't being used as well as it should have been. Okay, and this lack of unity, some of it is due to, profit. You've got several merchants who continue to sell to the British throughout the conflict. Military profit. Hey, I can make money off of weapons. Why not? Something that still happens now, right? American companies make money off of selling weapons to our military and others. Okay, so that was going on here. Textbook conclusion. This is a quote from the old textbook. I'm using some of my old lectures, guys, and tweaking them. I've already told you that, but only a select few of the colonists attached themselves to the cause of independence with a spirit of selfless devotion. Seldom have so few done so much for so many. I think that's a powerful quote because, I think it's safe to say that not a majority of the colonial, now 13 original state population was gung-ho about this, right? But the few that were gung-ho about it, they were all in, and they did a lot to bring the independence of the United States about, which is an understatement. Okay. All right, 1 slide to go and I'm done. Okay, and then I'll tell you about what I need you to work on. Okay, so militia, guerrilla warfare, yes, it's a factor, and I keep bringing it up because it can be glorified maybe too much in movies like The Patriot. The French, incredibly key factor, maybe the key factor. Some historians argue that, but also incredibly important is the fact that our military just got better. And much of that was due, quite frankly, to Baron von Steuben, who was a German general who fought with us, but will help whip, so to speak, the U.S. Army into shape. Okay. German general who superbly aided the U.S. Army into becoming a well-trained fighting machine. Okay. And he'll also stay in the United States. And a little bit of trivia here. I just like to mention this because of the stereotypes that exist out there. Baron von Steuben also happened to be a gay man, and many people knew about it. So I think it's important to mention that and to help with our understanding the fact that we still have prejudice with these issues today, which is hard to believe. Anyway, African Americans will fight and die with distinction once they are. We're late to do it, but in 1778, African American men that do fight, they do fight with distinction, and they do. It wouldn't surprise me if some of them ended up back into slavery. I've never really investigated it, but my understanding is that this is where we start to get, you know, there will be free blacks and free black populations, even in some places in the South, prior to the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. That happened even before this. There were times that slave masters let people buy their freedom, right? So there were ways to secure your freedom that were preserved for some black families and some black populations. This was another way to do it. So those that fought with distinction were granted their freedom at the end of the war. And then I've mentioned several times already that militiamen will contribute to guerrilla warfare victories. Okay. Any questions about this material? Now, usually I would require you to comment on it, but we've kind of already done that with this. I know you guys would have a lot of good questions if you thought about it, but I thought I just want to let you know. Let's see if it posted here. Stream is updated, good. Okay, so chapter 6, critical thinking questions. I get these, you probably see them. They're in the back of the chapter. I just choose which ones I would like you to answer. Didn't like these too much, so you lucked out. There's only 4 of them. And I would say these first 2, like these are actually just review questions, I would say. And then 3 and 4 are a little bit tougher. Those are the ones that make you think and evaluate a little bit. Okay, but those aren't due until Monday. And it's kind of tricky because some of you I'm not going to see till Tuesday. So don't be surprised if you see something else post on Monday, Tuesday, people. So you may want to have this done on Monday too. Okay, I haven't done my lesson plans for next week. But those you who aren't coming in on Tuesday, gold people, if you want to keep up, you probably want to have this done by Monday too, because there may be a new assignment posted on Monday, because you're supposed to get something asynchronous on Monday. If you don't see anything post, gold people, don't worry about it, but it could. So you still may want to have this done by Monday to keep pace, is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay. All right, any questions, my college students? All right, tomorrow we're going to do a primary document analysis. Supposed to do one of those a week. I've chosen 3 documents on events leading to the revolution. I'm going to put you into 3 chat rooms. Each chat room will be responsible for interpreting 1 document for me. There's just a sheet you're going to fill out, and then you'll share that with the rest of the class. Okay, so that's the lesson tomorrow. All right, you guys have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow.